Okay, so yesterday just finished this cabinet, got these top stretchers on. So today in this lesson we're going to be working on the doors and the drawer front for these two cabinets. So for both the upper and the base cabinet and the frameless. So just to show you what I did for the drawer front, since we're doing a very basic drawer front, this is just a solid piece of poplar. It's been ripped down from a 1x10 to around 8 inches. And this will go pretty much right there. All right. And this will attach itself to the drawer box once we build the drawer box. There's nothing else we need to do with this until we're done with the drawer. So as soon as you basically cut this part out, it's done. So I've cleaned the edges up with my joiner, but you could just use a sander if you don't have a joiner. And I used a nice clean cut for the edge here on my miter saw. So this drawer front is essentially ready to go. All we'll have to do is give it a final sanding and paint it, and then we'll attach it to the drawer box when we're done. So in the area below that, we're going to have our doors, and the doors will again be we're going to do shaker doors for this, nice and simple. We're going to go ahead and get started building those. Okay, so the first thing we're going to need to do for making these doors is get our groove cut in all the way around for our center panel, and this will also be part of the joint that joins the rails and the stiles together. So what I've done is I've gone and put my dado stack blade in here. It's set to 1/4 inch. Again, you could use 2 regular blades stacked together as long as the total width here, the total thickness here is 1/4 inch. And I'm setting the height off the table to 3/8 of an inch. So there's a couple ways I can do that. I could use a block, just a regular 3/4 inch thick block, and I drew a line right at 3/8 of an inch. I have a center line here. This is something that's going to be important later on. There's a pencil mark here that lines up with the shaft that this saw blade spins on. Okay, so whenever I'm keying or indexing this blade up, I want to make sure that if I'm trying to measure the highest point of the blade, that the tip of the blade is actually lined up with that line. And we'll use that again later on. So what I'm going to do is just put this blade next to it. You can see it's just shy of it. So I'm going to go ahead and rotate the shaft up just till it gets in right about there. Okay, so that should be about 3/8 of an inch high. The other way you can do it, if you like gadgets and tools and all that stuff, is to pick up one of these. This is a depth gauge, and it's marked for various different heights, and you could use this for whatever. It also works like this way if you wanted to do it, but you could also put it 3/8 right around there. This is a little deceiving because I'm setting it on this red plate, and this red plate is actually a bit down from the rest of the work surface. So 3/8, it seems like it's just right about there. So what I'm going to do now is set my fence. So when I run this is actually a piece of scrap wood. So when we run this rail or stile through it across this blade, it's going to put a groove right down the center, actually just like that. This is a previous scrap I made on a router table, but same goes with this. So I actually can use this to set this, and should be about 3/8 of an inch is where I want it for these two blades together, right? So that should be fine. All right, so I'm going to do a couple test runs with some scrap wood on here, and when I'm ready to go, we'll go ahead and start putting our grooves in our rails and stiles. Okay, I'm satisfied now that I have my blade height okay. I got my width set where I wanted to. My scrap block worked out okay. So I've got my pile of rail boards and stile boards. I have 2 rails for each board, 2 stiles for each door. And what I'm going to be doing is putting one of these grooves down on the edge of every one of these rails and stile boards. So let's go ahead and get started with that. While I'm doing this, I'm going to be very mindful that this blade could cause a lot of a lot of injury if I'm not careful, so I'm going to be pushing it through with a push stick and just keeping my hands relatively clear of the blade. Worst comes to worst, and you feel like the thing is going to slip away from you, just let go. You don't want to try endangering yourself here at all. If you feel more comfortable, you can also use some type of feather board to keep this board flat against the fence. In any case, I've done this a bunch of times, so I'm pretty comfortable, but still you want to be as careful as possible. All right, let's get started. Now that I've got my grooves cut in all of my styles and on the whole length and on my rails, remember that groove depth is about 3/8 of an inch. We're ready to do our next step in this process. And so these rails will actually, we'll cut a tongue out on the edge of them. And that tongue will be about 3/4 of an inch long, so we're going to make some changes here. But they will sort of intersect right there. So what I'm going to do next is, using a pencil, I'm going to mark using the rail itself, and these are 1x3s, so they're actually 2.5 inches wide. I'm actually going to make sure my hands are here out of the shot so you can see this. I'm just going to take a pencil and mark 2.5 inches down, right there on the style board, okay? And it kind of lets me know this. So this 3/4 inch section will be right in here. There'll be a tongue here, and we'll need to remove 3/4 of an inch of material further in here. So the groove right now is roughly right here, 3/8 of an inch. Okay, we need to expand that and remove all of that from the in part, just from this groove. So this groove will actually need to be deeper in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust the height of my blade. I'm going to raise it up from 3/8 of an inch to 3/4 of an inch, and I'm going to run my style boards through it just until this line I drew lines up with the line on the table that corresponds to the high point of the blade. Okay, so that'll end up putting a groove in here. It actually will be shaped rounded over kind of like that, okay, because this is a circular blade here, so we can't avoid that using this method, but it is what it is. But in any case, as soon as I push this style into the point where the lines mark up, I'll have a 3/4 inch wide groove right into here. And then when we do our tongues, this groove will be complete. What this will allow me to do, it'll still have a thinner, a less deep groove, a more shallow groove down the whole length of the board, just for the center panel. But for the ends where this tongue, or this mortise and tenon, depending on how you look at it, this mortise and tenon joint for these doors, we'll still have a deep section here. I hope that makes sense. If there's any questions on that, you can always leave me a comment or a question, or shoot me an email. But that's how we're going to do this. You could do this a little easier on a router table by making a more precise, deeper groove. But on a table saw, this works just as fine. And since this circular part here we're kind of modifying is going to be inside, you won't even see it anyway, so it should be fine. So in any case, I'm going to go ahead and adjust the height of this blade, and we'll go ahead and make this partial groove on both ends. So here, and then I'll rotate the board and push it through here. So I'm going to need to go ahead and put my 2.5 inch marks on both ends of all my style boards. I'll go ahead and do that now. Okay, so I've got all my style boards marked. I haven't adjusted my fence, so the groove will still be lined up, but I have raised my blade to 3/4 of an inch. And again, to mark that, to make sure I have it 3/4 of an inch, I actually just used a board and made sure the tip of the blade is just about flush with the thickness of the board, which is 3/4 of an inch. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so I just spent the last few minutes getting this tongue joint perfected on a piece of scrap wood. And that's what you want to do. You want to take a piece of board, a junk board you have lying around, that's just 3/4 of an inch thick, and make this practice run. And I'm going to show you how to do it on the production boards, but you do want to do any type of joinery. Doing it first on a scrap board is a great idea. So I knew I was ready to go when I'm using this against one of my production style boards, and I push it in there. I'll just flip this over and push it in this joint, and it should be nice and tight. So when we go to join these up and glue these up later, it's going to be like that. So it's not, if I kind of work it, it's not going to slip out. So a couple things to watch out for when you're doing this is if your tongue is too small, if it's too thin, it'll go in the joint real easy, but it'll slip out too easy. If it's too fat, when you push it in, it can actually crack your style boards along that groove mark, and that's not nice. That's not what you want either. So you want a nice joint that's just snug, a little interference fit. I actually probably made this groove. If you can see that, see that there. The groove in the styles, I probably made a little too deep. It's probably closer to 7/8 of an inch instead of 3/4 of an inch. Not a big deal, but anyway, that's something. I just wanted to note that it's critical. Now, if you see this, if you run into this issue where your groove is too deep on your style, you could be tempted to make your tongue a little longer. Now, that'll make that joint look real pretty, but it'll affect the overall dimensions of your door. And you don't want to do that if you already have your door parts cut. So just be mindful of that. It'll actually make it too narrow, and then it won't fit in our cabinet properly. So I'm just going to run with this, and this isn't a big deal. You could always fill that with some wood putty or glue and some sawdust if you run into that issue. But again, the big lesson here is always do this on some scrap pieces. Okay, so now I have my scrap piece all set. What I'm going to do is show you what this looks like on a production board. So I'm going to run one of my rail boards, and I have my fence set such that it's producing a 3/4 of an inch wide cut from the end, and it's also raised to the point where it eliminates both 1/4 inch edges and leaves me with a 1/4 inch wide tongue, just like we had on this production piece. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and run all my rails through. I'm going to run one edge through, and I'm going to push it against the fence, and then start to pull it out until I get my tongue revealed. I'll flip the board over, do the other side, and then I'll rotate the board and repeat that same process on the other side. So I have 4 rail boards. I'll do that on all 4 rail boards. After I do each rail board, I'll do a test fit to make sure it fits into the stiles. Okay, and then we'll be ready to then shift gears and work on our center panels. So let's go ahead and turn the table saw on. We've got our safety gear on, and we'll show you what this looks like. Okay, I made my first tongue joint on here. I'm going to try putting it in the style. One thing you may notice is you tend to get these little whispers of wood in here from where the edge of the groove, and that's fine. You can just leave them in there for now. They're not going to hurt anything. So we'll go ahead and see if this fits. Sometimes you run into the case where your production board still needs an adjustment, and that seems to be the case for this guy. So what I'm going to do is just give this my best shot at putting this together without stressing the joint too much. And no. So the table saw blade may have moved down a touch. So what I'm going to do is raise it up a hair. I'm going to raise the blade up just a hair and repeat that process again.